Welcome to the In Betwixt and In Between. This is Leadership Limbo, podcast aimed at helping middle managers and their supervisors embrace the discomfort and power of leading themselves and others in the midst of it all. We blend real insight with practical tools to help you lead with self-awareness, purpose, and influence wherever you are on your leadership journey. Season 3, here we are. Woo! I guess year 2, season 3, kind of breaking it up. I'm John Clark. I'm one of your co-hosts, and on the other side is Josh Hugo, or as I affectionately call him, Hugosaurus. Josh,
wow. Okay, yeah.
Are we doing it? I think this season, every time I'm just going to come up with some variation of Hugo that people can latch on to. How's that sound to you? You like that, Hugosaurus?
Yeah, that's a good one. There's
don't say them, because maybe we'll say them.
I won't give you any others, but the name does lend itself to lots of. I don't know if it's a prefix primarily, but it. There's other ones out there. I'm excited to see here.
I suppose it should be Hugosaurus, but Hugosaurus just sounds more affectionate.
It gives you two varieties. You can use one week over week.
I know. So, all right. Welcome to season 3. How are we doing? How's your time off been? Any updates?
Yeah, it's good.
For our adoring fans.
Yeah, it's our longest break so far, but
we didn't even leave them we didn't even replay episodes for them. We just said everybody take some time off. So there you go.
Yeah, everyone took some time off. I hope that you're rejoining us for our first episode of this next season. But yeah, the 4 weeks, I think it was, since our last episode were great. Some travel, got married.
Woohoo! Congrats.
Yeah, that's a big deal. Did some travel across the country by plane, by no train, a lot of automobile, a big drive across Colorado to the Midwest, and it was good. Rest is good. Vacation is good. Family vacations are a little different than like solo trips or like couples trips, but they all serve a valuable purpose. They're all fun in their own way, and so it was great. And how about yours? What's the last month been like for you, John, and for our listeners to kind of catch up a little bit with you?
Yeah, similar. Didn't get married.
Got married? No. Okay.
That was the only difference. Everything else was very similar. Although tomorrow is my, let's see, what year are we in? 16th anniversary is tomorrow. So happy anniversary to my wife. I don't be listening to this, but nevertheless, happy anniversary to her. And
happy anniversary, man.
Yeah, but no, good trips. It was trips that coincided with being with family. Went to a wedding for my sister-in-law and spent some time at the beach in Oregon. And back here in Colorado, we've now made this annual trip to this YMCA of the Rockies, where my kids are in like summer camps, and we get some really quality time, and all the grandparents are with us. So that was great. Home projects, just like, it was good. Summer's great. So we're enjoying it, but I am really thrilled to be back in this rhythm and to do something I love, which is getting leadership ideas out there with you and talking about them. And I think just sitting down yesterday to come up with some good ideas for things we want to talk about this season. I'm pretty excited for that. And so I think just as a reminder here at the beginning of season 3, it's a great time to share with folks about this podcast. So please download our podcast wherever you get those podcasts. We'd love a 5-star review, some comments. That really helps with circulation, gets people interested. That's how things like Apple and so on really determine that this is worth sharing on their platforms. And then just share it broadly. And we said this a lot, but we really love the idea of when you find an episode you like and leaders in your life, or I don't know, just anyone who could find value of them, sharing that episode with them to say, hey, this was an interesting take on a concept that I think you might find interesting. We really hope you use it to just further dialogue with others and to build community and so on. So please do that. And with that said, today, Josh and I are real excited to dig in on season 3. And we're going to start with an idea that Josh has written about lately and really been thinking about. And we wanted to bring it to here and talk to our audience about it, talk with each other about it, maybe debate it a little. Yeah. And so I'll toss it to Josh to talk a little bit about servant leadership.
Yeah. No, thanks, John. Great intro. I think I'm going to be a little rusty today after losing a little bit of my podcast chops. So, I hope you all bear with me.
I don't think we ever had podcast chops to begin with.
Yeah, so. I'm not sure what that even looks like. Just smooth talking, I guess. The dulcet tones of
Josh
podcast world.
Your Josh jazz hour, your jazz hour later in the day that you do instead on local radio. Do people know about that? No, I'm just kidding.
No, that would be fun. That's a real passion of mine. just haven't come out with that in the open. But
the odds flute, is that what we're? Yeah.
Well, servant leadership, yeah, that's our topic for today. I wrote a blog on this recently on my Substack, and Peak Perspective is the name of the publication. But this is not a new concept to me. It's not a new concept to a lot of our listeners, and in fact, I traced some of my own origin story around servant leadership when I was writing. But for those who did not read the blog, this goes way back. Like, this is very much baked into my identity, growing up in a family that was very service oriented, going through a high school whose mission was essentially explicit about servant leadership and being men and women for others in service. It's been part of my career and education. It's been part of really all parts of my life. And so I don't know that I had really questioned what it meant. I think I knew what it meant. I think that it also was like a badge of honor. And over the last few months, I started to kind of initially looking at that other idea of psychological safety and these common leadership terms that get pushed into organizations with good intentions and perhaps well-designed theories, but kind of quickly become shorthand for what I make the case for of immaturity, of less functional leadership. And servant leadership is one of those places where I think, without scrutinizing your own intentions and practices, you can fall victim to your own, maybe subconscious, maybe some of your own choices of leading less maturely as a servant leader. And so we wanted to spend some time with our listeners today talking a little bit more about that and really getting at the core question of, like, what does it mean to function healthily or healthfully as a servant leader, as opposed to one who may use that term but is actually functioning in a less mature way. I want to be really clear, and John and I had a good discussion about this. As we examine these words, what we're really trying to avoid is making this a superficial conversation that just rests at the surface when it comes to language. I think that there's a lot of opportunities to walk on eggshells because the term that you use could be offensive to somebody else, or the term that you use is, well, you didn't say it the right way. That's not what we're trying to get at. What we're really trying to get at as we explore these terms, these concepts, these constructs, is what's underneath it, right? So I think the goal today is less about just, is the word servant leadership accurate, but really what is underneath the practice of mature servant leadership as opposed to immature servant leadership. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the frame for today. John, I'll give you a moment here to kind of just, what are you thinking as I say that, reactions initially, and then I want us to spend just a brief moment defining what servant leadership is.
No, I think as this podcast evolves and we have to cover more topics and more ideas, a lot of what we have learned, and I think we even saw this last season, is we're probably going to discuss certain like words and topics and kind of the meaning and understanding of them, and how encouraging people to be thoughtful about what that means in terms of how they function, right? We've talked about extreme ownership. Josh just mentioned psychological safety, and I think servant leadership falls in that. But what we want to be careful of is it's very easy to get on these podcasts and just to listen to people have semantical arguments about why that word is wrong and why it's harmful to people. And I don't know. I lean very much out of that. I think language is language, and I think it's over time it evolves and we change words. But I also think when people spend most of their waking hours just trying to, challenge people constantly on the way they're saying things, I think we lose the thread, which is just like, well, how do we help people to act? And so I do think servant leadership fits into that, because I'll give you an example, and I'm sure we'll talk about this again. But, I think when when Josh and I came through our work life, we joined a program that was volunteer work. Essentially, we made very small stipends while and we were lucky, we got a master's out of it and stuff like that. So I don't want to make this sound like it was that, there was a lot that came out of that opportunity. But we, I think a lot of it was framed of like, how are you of service to your community? How are you of service to the community, the kids you serve, the staffs you serve at these schools you're in? And I think that was just the way we said it. But over time, I remember getting into other organizations and other places when you talked about like, who do you serve or who do I serve? people be like, oh, I hate that term because that makes it sound like the people you're working for have to be, that you have to serve them, that they can't, that they aren't autonomous in it. It just became this way of not getting at what the term meant, which was mostly like, no, it's just about my way to think about how I'm helping others. And so people kind of weaponize this idea of like, we don't say things like, who do we serve? We say, who are our clients? Or, and we'll talk about that a bit. But that's the thing I think we will talk about, but we also want to avoid. And I think the goal is, how are you thinking about how a term like this functions for you? How does it make you function? And watch out for some of the pitfalls that I think Josh has very well articulated through his article that we're going to discuss here. So that's my initial thought. Is you might hear some semantical arguments, but I encourage you as a person not to get too caught up in that, and actually to ask yourself how it manifests itself in your way of being is what we'll get at here.
That's right. That's the value of paying attention to language. I don't think it's worth dismissing it, because in as much as the language can evoke or indicate the underlying position that you are bringing, that's the value of exploring language. And I think that's where we're coming into this today. So servant leadership, over 50 years ago, Robert K. Greenleaf devised this philosophy and gave it its name, its concept. The Greenleaf Center is still in existence today. There's some good resources. I encourage you to check out their website. But the definition, or the paraphrase definition, as I see it, is servant leadership is a leadership philosophy in which the leader prioritizes the growth and well-being of people and communities by sharing power, putting others' needs first, and helping people develop and perform as highly as possible. And one of the images that you'll see if you search this term on the internet, you'll see a lot of triangles, or maybe two triangles next to each other, one of which has the traditional, more command and control structure, where the executive leadership is at the peak of the triangle and it kind of builds down.
I was hoping it was going to be the Triforce from Zelda, but go on. That's fine.
The adjacent triangle is reversed, where the people being served are kind of central to, I think, at the very top of the model. So it's a definite paradigm shift in its design. It's designed to center what the people need. What the word is not client necessarily, but you could put whatever term in. The object of great leadership, the purpose of great leadership, is to bring out the best in the people that you're leading. And so the concept itself, I want to be very clear, I think is right in so many ways. It's valuable. It challenges some of the dominant power structures and models that have existed. And I think we'll pause on that. John, you've actually, for our visual listeners could actually see this here, but take a look if you can. Otherwise, John, you can narrate what you're sharing for the audio listeners here.
Yeah, I hadn't seen it, and I like that idea, and we have the opportunity for video, and some people do watch this on YouTube, but on the screen, it's pretty basic. It's a triangle, but the very top corner of the triangle on the servant leadership side, it says bottom up, love and service, right? So love and service to others. I'm on the bottom, and I elevate those and they move up. So it's that inverted triangle. And then on the other side, it says typical leadership, which is that top-down control, right? Which is this person sitting at the top of the triangle who's kind of highlighted in a navy blue, and then a lighter blue is the rest of the people below them. So, think about even things like, you can imagine how things like trickle-down economics are kind of inherent in that structure and things like that. So pretty basic, but you can see how that is a really different shift in how you think about that person in that corner of the triangle and how they function and what that means for them. Because obviously, if you're on the bottom, I guess I would think about it this way too, you got to do really good to serve those above you, because they have the potential to, if you're just thinking about like gravity, to hurt you, I guess, a lot more, because there's many of them. And so being of service to them is important. So I'll remove that, but wanted to share that.
It's good. It's good. Yeah. So, I mean, I think a lot of people, I actually got some people who emailed me afterwards and thanked me for the article, or said, as an aspiring servant leader, this was really helpful for me to think about. And I think the reason for that reaction is that, one, this is a very common and present term across all sorts of organizations. One of the people who emailed me is in corporate finance. Another person who responded is in coaching. Another person is in nonprofit work. And so it's across all different business and nonprofit ecosystems. It's almost in many ways like the gold standard of what you want to try to be as a leader. And yet, there's things that I think can go wrong with it. And that's where we wanted to spend some time today. And we're going to present, I think, 3 archetypes. And I think a brief note on archetypes. I think they're valuable. I think that for people who have not yet spent the time processing what could be going on in certain like behavioral tendencies, an archetype provides some definition, it provides some structure. I also want to be clear in saying that any one of us could have all 3 archetypes. Maybe you don't have any of those that apply to you. They're amorphous. They kind of blend together at times. In one scenario, you might be embracing one approach, and in a different setting, you might be taking a different archetype. So they're not meant to box you in. They're not meant to be like this definitive identity marker for you and your leadership for the rest of your life. But it might allow you to do an initial exploration of, oh, yeah, gosh, that is something I tend to do. And what we hope to do with this then is share a few ideas of what it might look like to kind of break through some of the barriers that are getting in the way of truly high functioning, mature, self-differentiated servant leadership.
Yeah. Do you think it's worth, even before we get into those archetypes, to just at large talk about some of the tension you felt or were beginning to feel about servant leadership?
I love that. Do you want to start? Do you have a reaction to that question yourself first?
Yeah, no, fair. When Josh started talking about this, and even you heard it the last season, he's like, I'm not sure that servant leadership is good. And to me, it's that I am one of those people. People who listen to enough of this episode have seen me even with the word manager really try to defend it. Like, no, there is real value in this term and what it can mean if done well, because so many other people try to just, I think, do things where it's leader versus manager. So basically we can get rid of the term manager, right? As an example of this. And my approach, for whatever reason, maybe because I like traditional ways of thinking or order or whatever it is it's not to abolish the system. It's to build it up the way it's meant to be, or the better way, right? Around what already exists. And so for me, servant leadership is something that's been a really big, strong part of my identity, of doing work that I felt bettered the life of others, that helped them, that had a bottom line element to it, but it wasn't only about the bottom line. Was, kind of taken aback on that. I said, no, we're going to get into this argument about, and then we're going to teach people that, they're going to end up being more selfish because of how they say, well, servant leadership isn't really a thing, and whatever else it is. Right. And so, I think, I don't want to steal your thunder, Josh, of really why you came to the way you did, of like wanting to challenge this enough to write about it. But my first thought was just, man, the moment we get in there and start telling people like, we don't, servant leadership is just about overfunctioning and you shouldn't do that, then I don't want to be part of the dialogue that encourages people to think, to then turn that to the opposite way, which is
command and control,
right? And I think that's the better way, because that creates the differentiated leader who sits outside of the system and is so principled that it's their ideas and their thoughts that really determine the direction of places. Because that, as we've talked about with the differentiated leader, that is a possibility of that, is you misinterpret it to mean it's about me as the center point who makes all the decisions, and because I'm so principled or so assured, we do what I want. And I don't want to contribute to that conversation. And I think the bigger thing is that the bigger conversation I think is interesting is how individuals really define and think about what it means to be an appropriate, responsible servant leader who makes things better for others,
right.
Not only because I do things for them, but because they learn how to handle the challenges of life in the workplace.
Right.
But then also, I think this is a fair point, Josh, that we talk about, is when your leader, so the boss of your organization, or if you're the head of a school, let's use that as an example for you and me, and you say, we are going to be a school of servant leaders. What is implied in that? Are you helping people to understand that so that they know how to use servant leader in a non-overfunctioning way to be a servant leader? Or are you actually using it to be like, hey, we kind of go along with what's said here because our job is just to be followers and servants of people, not to ever challenge things. And I think that's you have to ask your motivation in trying to build a team or an organization that calls itself servant leaders as well. So
Yeah.
few thoughts in there, but I know you've given a lot more thought to this, so I'll turn it to you on that.
No, it's good. And I
Or to
think that
react on
all of us listening, I think need to, if I'm going to make a point here, it's that think about what you're saying. Think about what it is that you're signing up for. Think about the term, the concept, the approach that you're using. And where I would add a little bit of nuance to what you shared, John, is I think that self-differentiated leadership is certainly not under a particular paradigm like command and control. It doesn't lean that way. It doesn't lean towards servant leadership. Really, what that is all about is having a healthy relationship to understanding your responsibility and the responsibility of others as you're leading. Command and control, within its own definition, says control, which means that you are taking over for the thinking and the responsibility of other people more than you should. Servant leadership might tend to lead itself towards another form of that, where you're taking over the functioning of others because the intention behind it is that you really care for them and and you think that people really need help. And that the help that really helps is not always, if ever, taking over for them. So
yeah, and both of those are some form of overfunctioning or underfunctioning, which
that's
is
right.
Really both of those are more about your response to the emotional system, and either like, I don't want to deal with these people, so I'm going to take control, or I don't want to deal with these people, so I'm just going to take it on for them. Right. That's ultimately what it comes down to. Yeah.
That's concisely shared. So I think that the reason that we're coming up with this is that more practically speaking, a lot of servant leadership can lead to burnout, can lead to exhaustion, can lead to resentment, can lead to depression, anxiety, chronic anxiety, because I think that the roots of most of those pathologized words there is our ability or inability to appropriately carry responsibilities that belong to us. And as we begin to carry responsibilities that do not belong to us, it's when those conditions, if you will, start to show up more. And coming out of the world of education for a long time, burnout, depression, anxiety, chronic health issues are abundant in that space. And I think that I'm not going to say that servant leadership, the concept of it, has done that. I would say that it is related to the overall concepts we're going to get to here, which are some of the immature archetypes that can exist underneath this belief in servant leadership. So what I'm going to do, I think, John, is I'd like to share kind of just very concisely these three, and then we can talk about that. How's that sound to you?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's do it.
So the first two are actually forms of this overfunctioning. And as a reminder, overfunction means you are taking on responsibilities that do not belong to you. You're taking the responsibilities that belong to somebody else, and you're kind of carrying those yourself. The first side of that coin is the form of the hero, which we've talked about, or a controlling approach to servant leadership. It's often the high performer who comes in, deep mission commitment, believes the opportunity to change, to tear apart the paradigm that's existed. Somewhat fanatical even can come in, often highly celebrated members of a community because they're driven, they're vision oriented, they're mission oriented. Very overfunctioning types. We came out of a charter network world that frankly had a lot of these people in it because it's an appealing way to think about change. And a lot of stuck systems require transformational leadership, and transformational leadership in its less mature form is often shared by a very powerful, clear, driven leader who more or less through force, will, and coercion might even get people to move forward, but it's not through their choice to follow as much as it is almost the fear of not following. So that's kind of the first archetype. The second archetype is another form of overfunctioning, but it's not so much the coercion, fear, and control approach to making sure this mission's achieved. It's almost the ruinously empathetic side. So the overly empathetic absorber is kind of what I would call that. The person who knows that it's such tough mission work. They want to support people. They're very aware that they're probably underpaid. They are stressed out. They're dealing with tough human situations, whether as a teacher, as a school worker, as a mental health professional. And there's a lot of absorption for people's underperformance. And they might say, oh, as a servant leader, it's really my job to carry the weight of your pain. And so that is a second kind of archetype here. Absorbing other people's problems is not your responsibility. It is your responsibility to create the conditions for them to relate to those challenges with their own agency and responsibility underneath that. So that's the second archetype. And then the third archetype is actually what I would put in the underfunctioning category. This is maybe perhaps found more at the burnout stage of one's career. It's probably not where most people start, but the deferential decision maker, another way to think of this is kind of hitting this point of decision fatigue. And the deferential decision maker is actually putting the responsibility that belongs to you as the leader to make a final decision, to help, provide clear, structured guidance towards solving a problem. Instead of doing that, it sounds a lot like, well, what do you guys think?
Yeah.
Let's take this back to a working group. Let's take this to a committee. I don't have enough information, even if it's been weeks, months, years of trying to decide something. If it's like, well, you know what? I think that the majority of people want this. It kind of looks like a little bit of, I don't know what the right word would be, but your leadership starts to lack much clarity, purpose, and drive. And I think that servant leaders can find themselves in this place where you're just too deferential. You're too willing to kind of, not that you shouldn't be listening to people, but at some point it almost, the organization doesn't know who's really leading it anymore. So those are three types of ways I'm thinking about this. So I'm going to pause on that. And John, I want to hear what you're thinking.
Well, in just that last one, it gets caught up. What you're doing is you get caught up in the concern about what becomes more important is ultimately like everyone feeling good about it versus the decision itself, right? So collaboration is always, and getting feedback is always going to be about, at the end of that, about making the best decision given the information you have, not making the decision that's going to make everyone happy. And so
right.
that's where and that's what happens is you get stuck and you don't make decisions and you pedal around forever and you delay things. And so it's because it's out of this desire to be good for everyone. And I think, all of these have some overlap. And I think for me, I just want to make to put a fine point on what we said. Hero and controller looks like it's called service, but it is a little bit more about, I'm just going to take control because it's easier for me to do this than worrying about all you. There's a little bit more villainy sort of ness to that, but it's also, well, I believe if I just take this on, I'm very capable. Everybody will appreciate that. So that's one where people are like, great, John or Josh or whoever, I just do what they tell me to do. And in some organizations that work, and in other places it causes resentment. The overly empathetic absorber, I have a good example of this. I was in a workshop this week and basically they have a really complicated situation where they serve like 2 clients and then even more clients beyond that. It's kind of hard to explain. But one strategy they came up with that I pushed them on was the guy who's the most senior of the group. He said, hey, use me, like put those things on me so I can go to them to push back on some ideas. And I understand sometimes that works because of his status and the way this client sees it. But the other question was like, but is that going to force people to lean into not engaging with the clients at all on their own level as managers and so on? And do you just rely on him? And then what happens when that goes wrong? And so that's that idea of, well, I'm just going to absorb all the challenges of this. I'm going to be the one to talk to senior management. I'm going to be the one to talk to the C-suite, whatever it might be. And it eliminates any kind of decision-making or pressure on the team, right? So
that's a great signal. That is like probably of all of these archetypes, John, the indicator I see most is the leader where everyone thinks they're doing the right thing by bringing the challenges to them. And the leader is thinking like, well, I'm here to serve. It's my job to solve these problems. I don't want my people to have to struggle. So come to me with it all. And you become the bottleneck, you get burned out, and you end up really creating a disempowered culture.
Yeah.
I think that's a really great anecdote.
And I want to talk about each of these a little bit more if we want, but one thing that really struck me, I think, in this whole conversation is, and you just said it, I don't want people to suffer. And I think that's a key thing, even going back to Greenleaf's philosophy here, is there's a difference between my role in reducing suffering and eliminating suffering. Like, nobody can eliminate suffering. Like, no one. Like, you can't eliminate that for people. But you find yourself in these spots with leaders that are like, any sort of feeling that people might be uncomfortable or be challenged by something or have a difficulty, all of a sudden comes this like burden for you to bear of like, how do I get this away from people? How do I take that off of them? And actually, I would argue that's as bad as the type of more top-down villainy sort of leader, because that is not your role to eliminate that altogether. And honestly, if you're listening to this and you're not a manager, but you're managed by someone, and you found yourself being like, why do they make this so hard for me? Just do a little bit of the exercise of asking, well, is it important for you to work through that yourself a little bit and work with your manager on that versus assuming it's their job to make everything easy for you, right? And
Sure.
I think that's something I would always ask leaders is, okay, are you doing your part to reduce the suffering of your team and to share the load and for everyone to, be part of this together? Or do you find yourself trying to eliminate it for everyone? Because if that's the case, you probably need to look at some of the things you're doing, and you're probably liking just like making decisions on your own because, like, honestly, you don't trust people and you think this is easier than making them deal with it. You're being too deferential, as Josh talked about, or you're like taking on the load from like the client or everyone else so people don't have to deal with it. And those are going to be those three archetypes. So anyway, it's a bit the idea of suffering and how do we reduce it versus eliminate it has been something I'm thinking about here. Yeah.
Well, I think that's great. And I actually think that's a good segue into the so what part. So like, what are you doing? And I think what you just said is the first recommendation I shared, which was, you really got, if you heard what we've shared here, if you end up reading this article and you read it and say, oh gosh, I find myself a little bit in this position, you need to do some time, spend some time with yourself to examine what the motivation is underneath it. What's your posture towards the situation? And it might force you to look in the mirror in some uncomfortable ways. Like, is this really about me? And that is, that's a toxic pill to swallow if you're especially in a nonprofit mission driven, business. Like, oh, is this really about, no one wants to acknowledge their own selfishness easily, or at all. But frankly, each and every one of these postures to some degree carries a degree of selfishness, right? If you're taking responsibilities away from somebody else, somebody who might need to sit with their own discomfort, their own suffering about a problem, and you take it away by absorbing it, it's selfish, because what you're really doing is saying, I don't think this person has enough ability to do it for themselves. I don't want to give them the gift of learning how to solve this problem in a durable way. So I'm just going to grab it from them because it will help us get through this faster.
Yeah.
Right? Or the deferential decision maker, selfish as well, because you're really putting the job of making difficult decisions, which is what you're hired and paid to do, onto everyone else when they don't have the authority to actually do that. And that is another form of selfishness. And so I think it's really important to put the mirror up and say, what are my motivations behind these tendencies? It doesn't mean you should be judging yourself or hanging your head in shame. There's not time for that. But there does need to be time for you to look at the mirror and say, you know what, where's this coming from? And this is where multi-generational family systems work comes into play. Were you raised to be a hero? Were you raised to be a peacemaker? Were you raised to kind of, take the heat from your brother and sister when they were having a fit and then get praised by your parents for not jumping in, right? Are you somebody who really had a highly engaged older brother or a really involved dad or mom who did a lot of things for you, and yet you were still somewhat successful or very successful in certain ways, but you never really learned to take responsibility for your own self because other people would do it. And now you're in leadership and you're doing the same stuff. So there's a lot of inner work required when you start to see tendencies here.
And to me, there's two things that come out of what you said there too. Number one is I would encourage people to think about like the language of sacrifice or sacrificial and ask like, what does it mean to sacrifice appropriately for others, right? I think sometimes we think, again, that's not, I like that term because it's so strong, right? The idea of sacrifice, especially in this discussion of servant leadership. So I don't have much to say on that.
Sure. It's a good
If
word to
you are
think
being
about.
asked to sacrifice, or you're thinking about like it's important for me to sacrifice to others, I actually agree with that to a certain degree. Again, I think it's another word you asked to like what degree and what does it mean. Um, and then the second thing is to this point, I think it's actually interesting to think about servant leadership and if you're a leader in the context of different people. What does servant leadership mean for my client? What does servant leadership mean for the people that I manage and the team that I work with? And what does servant leadership mean for the people that, I report to? And
Mm,
I think you have servant leadership in all those spaces, but really asking yourself, what does it mean to be of like an appropriate servant who doesn't underfunction, maybe even overfunction to these different parties?
yeah.
So I won't get too much into that, but I
It's good.
encourage you to like almost do a T chart and ask yourself like really deliberately, what does it mean to be a servant leader to these different entities that I, as a middle manager, often, or this line manager role that we talk about, am responsible to? And how do I
Hmm.
do that in a healthy way that, I think we'll get to like that doesn't impact me to the point that I can't do the work anymore. So,
Yeah.
next one, Josh, what's the second so what here?
Yeah, I think another piece of just being a higher functioning leader, a more mature leader, is solidify your principles. And I actually, I also name like lead with your values, and I think values are kind of the core expression or the core beliefs that you would not change even when pressed, right? So if one of your stated values, and I use this as an example, is courage, but then the last three conversations that you had with somebody, you bit your tongue about sharing the thing that you needed to share, then either you're not living out courage well, or that might just not be a core value of yours. So that's the first thing is I think it's really helpful. There's some good resources online, values cards you can buy over Amazon, where you go through an exercise and come down to the values that are truly core. Principles are the behavioral expressions of those values. So it's almost a way of saying this is what I do under these circumstances, and this is why I do it, and here's how I show up for those moments. Um, Having those present is really important. So if you've identified, for example, that you do have tendencies to absorb too much, but you do believe your value is courage, and you do recognize that maybe you've just haven't taken the next leap in your own development, you might say, well, the principle I really want to hold myself to is that even when I have a tendency to want to say this is really hard for you, I'm always going to add the word and. And I think it is important that you sit in this struggle a little bit. And I want to see you grow through this challenge. Where can I be useful to you? And that might become a principle that you use to say, you know what, I know my tendency, but I'm going to stand by this principle. I'm going to put on my whiteboard in front of me. I'm going to write it on paper. I'm going to work with ChatGPT to come up with phrases that might help me to say this in a way that makes sense to my team. But use values and principles to work your way through some of these potentially immature tendencies that get in the way of truly effective servant leadership.
And there are ways to this point that Josh made about, and I want you to struggle with this a bit or be challenged by this a little bit. There are ways to build that mindset in people before the challenge itself arises. Like you can do work with your leadership teams, you can do work with your employees, you work with yourself to actually say, hey, one of the things that's really important to us is to know that everyone is going to have to handle complexity, and none of us are in charge of saving the other. I was just dealing with a team the other day that they're a team based on heroics. Like, hey, we're so willing to go outside of our area of control to help others. We're so willing to step up when someone needs it. That there's nothing wrong with that, except when it becomes so habitual that like no one actually knows what their lane is, and so it becomes impossible to just stick to doing your thing well. Um, and so, as a leader, setting the conditions where, hey, yes, we are here to help each other. We are here to support, but also we are here to help each other deal with complexity and work through that so we can be stronger on the other end of that as well. So,
Yeah.
well
Yeah.
said. So, your
Yeah.
last one here.
And the last one here, I think this topic's come up in multiple ways, and it could mean a lot to anyone who hears it. But I say focus on your health. What I really mean by that, of course, is what it might sound like to your physical health, your spiritual, your mental health. A little bit more relevant to servant leadership, I would say there may be a culture around you where everyone identifies as servant leaders, and there's a culture of burnout, overwork, saving other people, rescuing people, despair, people in FMLA all the time, right? If you're around that culture, it's easy to kind of say, well, for me to show up in this space, to be part of the team, I kind of need to think that way too, or act that way, or treat my health in that sort of transactional way of, well, in exchange, the sacrifice for the work, that's what I'll do. I think that's a bad idea. And I wrote like this phrase, like, the world does not need more martyrs. It needs healthier, more sustainable leadership. And I truly believe that. And leadership done consistently over a long time is definitely more valuable than the rocket ship burst of energy for 6 to 18 months. And then you're like, nah, I can't do this. The world needs leaders who consistently show up and build their practice and trade. You can't do that if you're not healthy. And I think that the layer below that is, I think it's really worth defining what you mean when you identify with a concept, right? So if you say, I am a servant leader, what does that mean? Like, define that. And I think, John, you named this early in this episode. What is the definition of it? What is it really meant to be? Don't just, grab bag that term, apply it, slap it on top of immature, lower functioning practices you have and say, well, that justifies me not doing anything about it. And I think that is where an over association and over identification with a single term is maybe not the problem in and of itself, although it could be, but the real problem is not defining what does that mean. So I think if there's a phrase you can ask yourself when you say something that's an identity-based statement over the next couple of weeks as a leader.
Yeah, I want to go back to
what does that mean? What does that mean is the question you want to ask yourself. What do I mean when I say I'm a servant leader? And define it.
Yeah, and I think we've made that point with extreme ownership, certainly with psychological safety. If you're an organization or a leader who just hears the term and then you're like, cool, I'm going to bring this to my team and talk about it, it's going to flounder because you haven't actually spent time thinking about what it means to put that into practice. And so if you are going to, if one of the things your organization is going to be or your team is going to be is servant leaders, wonderful. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But you better define what it means to be that so you don't create a bunch of overfunctioning or underfunctioning people who burn themselves out and feel like this isn't sustainable. And I think that goes back to this idea of martyr. The issue I would take with martyrdom is let's actually leave martyrdom with what it actually is, which is like true sacrifice of people for a cause. And by cause, I mean like they're willing to die for it. Most of us do not fit into that. So when people talk about themselves in the workplace as a martyr, what you mean is you're just working really hard, right? Or you're taking on things for others. And so this is a spot where I'd be like, get rid of that word. I would argue need more martyrs, but in a very different way. Sure. And it's hard to be a martyr. Most of the people listening to this podcast aren't in positions to be martyrs. And so to Josh's point, servant leadership should never be about what we call martyrdom or sacrificing ourselves. It should be about actually creating the better good for others. And sometimes that means through letting them do more in an intentional way and letting them deal with suffering a little bit so they can handle it too. Right. So if you find yourself being like, oh, I'm just so willing to do stuff and I find myself taking on more for others and I burn out and I'm such a martyr for others, you're just at that point, you're being self-aggrandizing because you have control over that, I would argue. Right.
Yeah.
So, some really good stuff. What do you got to wrap with here, Josh? What's your takeaways from this? How did this change the way even you reflected on it in your writing, if anything, would you say? Or what do you got?
Good questions. I mean, I think the first thing I would share is, if you're listening to this and this has grabbed your attention, good. That's the goal, is to get you to think. What could you do for homework? I would say explore these 3 archetypes and ask yourself, do you tend to find yourself under this controller, this absorber, or this deferential decision maker? And then start doing the work of wondering what's underneath it. Where's this coming from? It's not going to be a quick, that's where it came from. It's an ongoing dialogue with yourself. Could be a really good opportunity to sit with a coach. Could be a really good opportunity to, spend some extended time really unpacking where this stuff comes from, because it's going to get in the way. If it hasn't bit you yet, it will bite you. And I think that comes from both personal experience as well as seeing a lot of other leaders work through this sort of martyr-based approach to leadership. And it really just isn't beneficial to the cause that you're working towards. It's not beneficial to your team. So do the work, ask the questions, put the mirror up. So that would be my suggestion of homework. I enjoyed the conversation. I think it's an ongoing one for me. I appreciate the tension between dismissing a term because it has problems, as opposed to exploring a term, being more precise with the language of what it means, and still accepting it as a valuable direction. And I think that's really where I came into this conversation believing the right answer is. It's not to throw away the baby with the bathwater, but it is to explore with more nuance, which I know that word is not a prized word these days in a lot of circles, is nuance and gray area. But explore the nuance of the terms you're using, explore your relationship to it, and always ask yourself, am I maintaining the responsibilities for myself and for others where they belong, or am I starting to take it over or push it over to somebody else? So that's the food for thought I'd leave people with. John, last word for you, and then we'll close out.
Yeah, if you like this conversation and what we're talking about here, join us going forward. We're going to continue on these ideas, these big topics. I got a few guests coming up that we're excited for, but room for more guests, more topics. So we'd love you to share things that are on your mind as you're dealing with the day-to-day challenges of leadership that you would like to hear two other people just reflect on. So bring those ideas to us because we want to be responsive to them. So with that, Josh, close this out.
Thanks, John. Until next time, this has been Leadership Limbo, where we make space for the tension and tools for the journey. See you in the in-between.